Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca, otherwise known as Hypnit Online, and this is podcast episode 19. So this is the first podcast episode of 2025. I have two finished objects to share, one garment and one accessory. I have some updates on some long-standing whips. I have a new exciting cast on, and I have some acquisitions to share at the end of the episode. So I can start with my first finished object, which is the last garment that I finished in 2024, and it was my Barco Bolero. It up here. I am wearing a black slipover, so hopefully you can kind of see it. This is actually the same yarn now that I'm thinking about it. The Barco Bolero was something that I cast on in August of last year. I took a little bit of a break on it for a few months, and then I picked it up again in December. And in December, I only had one sleeve left, so it was pretty quick to finish up and try to regain my knitting motivation again on some of these longer term whips. So this bolero, I was using the leftovers of the Highland slipover from this project here. I had about two skeins left, and I figured it was kind of an awkward amount, but maybe enough to make a bolero, which is a super cropped sweater. So the Barco Bolero is a pattern by Sofie Sorensen. The pattern calls for 2 strands of fingering weight yarn held together. I believe it's Sire Trio 2 and Bommelin on 4.5 millimeter needles. For my bolero, I used 1 strand of Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino in the shade Black, which is a discontinued yarn, but I think the Loops and Threads Luxe Merino is the same thing. They just rebranded it with a new name. So I used, like I mentioned, 2 balls of that yarn just held on its own, so like a DK weight on 4 millimeter needles, because I've worked with this yarn quite a number of times in the past, and I kind of know how much it's going to grow with blocking. So I just automatically sized down to 4 millimeter needles. And this bolero I really wanted to wear as kind of like a transitional piece where I could throw it on over some tanks or some dresses in the summertime. I finished it in December, so I'll find some ways to wear it this winter. But I did really want to knit a bolero because I do think that boleros have been quite trendy the past few years, so it was a nice bonus that I was able to knit one for myself. And this bolero in particular caught my attention because of the shaping that's in the bolero. You can see that the bottom has a curved hem that's achieved with short rows. So the way that this bolero is constructed is top down. You start off with the front or the back piece. They're both worked in the same way. You're doing the same thing twice. So you cast on those front and back pieces, and you just cast on with a long tail cast on. So you get a rolled hem along the top, but I don't think that it's uncomfortable or anything because there's no shaping. It's not tight or anything against your neck. So just a nice, I think, pretty clean looking modern effect. And then you work down until you reach the short rows. And I was thinking that this silhouette is kind of similar to the blouse number 1 or the blouse number 1 light, which is a saddle shoulder construction. So a different construction to this, but it kind of has the same look along the neckline, like this boat neckline. So I thought about using the blouse number 1 pattern and just knitting a super cropped version of it because I already had that pattern in my library. But the Barco Bolero here has short rows along the bottom, and that was something that I just wasn't sure I'd be able to kind of figure out by myself. So that's why I ended up getting this pattern. And the way that the short rows are worked in this pattern are really unique. I've never really done it like this before. I feel like with short rows, I'm used to kind of doing it in like a boomerang construction where you would knit to one short row, then you would make your turn, and then knit to your next short row, and then do your turn, and you just keep repeating that until you achieve the total number of short rows that you want. But with this bolero, you're working these short rows separately. So as you're working each piece, you knit this set of short rows, and then you go on to knit the other side of short rows after that. So that was a new construction to me. I thought it was pretty cool, and I learned something new with this bolero as well. So then once you finish the front and the back panel, you join them in the round for a few rounds for the underarm before you cast off. And for the sleeves, there's a sleeve cap construction. So you pick up stitches along the sleeve here, and then you work quite a number of short rows to get a pretty tight sleeve cap. It's pretty fitted to your shoulder, this bolero. So you work the sleeve cap here, and then the sleeve has a pretty slight bell shape to it. It increases towards the bottom of the sleeve, and the way that that is achieved is you work, once you finish the sleeve cap, you work a few rounds of decreases here to make it a little bit more fitted to the top of your arm, and then you switch your needle size. So the first part of the sleeve you work on your main needle, so in my case it was 4mm needles, and then I switched to 4.5mm needles for a section, and then you switch one more time up to a 5mm needle for the bottom. And I have mixed feelings about that construction, but maybe I can get into that now, speaking to, I guess, my overall feelings about the bolero and the modifications that I made to this piece. So the pattern has really basic finishing across all of the hems. So for the cast on, it's just a long tail cast on. For the bottom of the body of the bolero, it's just a knit cast off. And I wasn't too sure about that because of the yarn that I used. So Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino is a superwash merino and acrylic blend. It is, I believe, 45% acrylic, 55% merino. And so I knew that it wasn't going to sit totally flat, I guess, if I cast on and knit stitch here, and I really didn't want this bottom part of the bolero to flare out too much. So what I did instead is I chose to do a 3-stitch I-cord cast off. So when I was ready to cast off, I just cast on 3 stitches and then worked a I-cord bind off. And I like the I-cord bind off. I didn't size up the needle or anything like that. And I like it because it would be a little bit more fitted while still being stretchy compared to just a regular knit bind off. And so I do really like the fit of this bolero. Because of the short rows, the bolero kind of fits like right over the largest part of your bust. And with this I-cord cast off, I feel like it's still really fitted without it being really tight, and it doesn't flare out either. So I'm really happy with that modification. And then for the sleeve cast off here, I was debating doing also an I-cord cast off, but if you can kind of tell, it might be kind of hard to see in the black yarn. It's a little bit bulky. So I didn't really want to do that for the sleeve. So I decided to just cast off in purl stitch instead of knit stitch to kind of counteract the stockinette from curling too much. And I think it really helped. And I actually am really surprised how straight I was able to block out this hem. It doesn't really curl too much. So yeah, just did a purl cast off there. And I think that was the extent of my modifications. Otherwise, I knit this to pattern. And if I didn't already mention, I knit a size extra small. In terms of how I felt about the pattern though, like those modifications that I made were just for my personal preference and things that I adjusted because of the yarn composition. But there are some things about the pattern that I didn't particularly enjoy, I guess. So the first thing is, I guess the major thing for me is the sleeves here. So when I first saw this pattern, I did notice the bell sleeve shape, and I really liked that. But I didn't really realize that that was achieved by changing the needle size, and I would have preferred if there was maybe some increases that were worked into the sleeve so you could still continue to work in your main needle size. I feel like for me, because I work this in black yarn, the change in the size of each individual stitch isn't that noticeable. But if I was working in like a brighter or a lighter color, and even like a different fiber composition, like the merino I think has a lot of bounce to it and it fills in a lot of the gaps. But if I was working with like a linen or something, I don't think I would have liked that you would see the stitches increasing in size too. I just think it just looks a little bit messy to me. I don't really like that look, and so I was okay with it because I knit it in black yarn, but I didn't really realize that until I got the pattern. And then another thing I noticed about this pattern is the suggested yardage amounts. So when I was looking at the pattern webpage, it said you needed 350 grams of yarn, and that was kind of it. it didn't really specify if it was 350 grams of each yarn or 350 grams total, because the suggested yarn combination is 2 strands of fingering weight held together. And I just couldn't imagine that you would need 350 grams of each fingering weight yarn for such a cropped sweater. So I just assumed it would be 175 grams of each, at least for my size. I was just looking at my size when I was looking at the yardage amounts. And so 175 grams of Hipster Trio 2 is, I wrote it down. So 175 grams of Hipster Trio 2 is 612 meters. And for this bolero, I weighed it once I was finished my project, and I used 180 grams or 450 meters of the Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino. So I would say a significantly lower amount of yarn, like more than 150 meters if I'm doing the math correctly. So I realized that for the yardage amounts, I can't speak to other sizes, but I do think that the estimated meterage is a little bit off for this pattern. And then the last thing, I feel so critical about this pattern, but it was just kind of my thoughts when I was knitting this. I didn't really love the way that the pattern was written either. There wasn't any errors per se, but I just felt like the pattern was kind of structured a little bit strange. It kind of felt like it was one really long sentence that was just broken up into different lines. So if you've knit previous patterns before, I don't think that you'd have an issue with it because there wasn't any mistakes per se. It just wasn't the clearest written pattern. And I noticed that especially when I was working the short row instructions here, it took me a little bit to read it a few times to kind of understand it, because that was also the first time I was working the short rows in that way. I think if you've knit a pattern before, you shouldn't have any issues with the pattern. It just wasn't my favorite. So those were my thoughts on the bolero itself. In terms of the yarn, I really like using Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino. I think it's a great budget alternative if you don't mind using a merino acrylic blend. I've knit several sweaters with it, held with mohair. This was the second time that I just used the yarn by itself, and I think it's held up really well. I don't notice it pilling a lot. I mean, I just finished this garment a few weeks ago, but I have worn this a few times. I don't really notice it pilling. It's really comfortable to wear, mainly because it's very cold outside, so I don't find myself sweating with this, but I do think even in the summertime, it's still going to be comfortable to wear. It's like a DK weight yarn that has some really nice bounce to it and stretch, so I think it's going to be really comfortable and it's going to hold up really well in this shape. So I really like Cozy Wool Merino. I'll continue to use it in projects as well. So overall, I'm really happy with this bolero, and I'm just glad to have finally finished it because it was a late summer knit cast on. So that was the first finished object. The second one I don't have here because I gifted it away. I just have the remnants of it, and it is the Hipster Hat by Petite knit. So I knit a Hipster Hat as a gift knit for the holiday season. It was one of the only things that I gifted away this year, and I gifted it to my boyfriend's dad. So I knit him another hat before. I knit him the Oslo hat, also another hat pattern by Petite knit, if you haven't heard of it, but I'm sure you have. So I knit him the Oslo hat 2 years ago, and that was, I think, probably the first hat that I ever knit, and it was, I used Cascade Heritage, which is a superwash merino wool. And so I knit the largest size in the pattern, and once I blocked the hat grew a ton. It was a ginormous hat, and I was a little bit embarrassed to gift it to him, but I did spend a lot of time on it, and so I did give it to him, but it was very clear that the hat was way too big. I think he found a way to wear it though. He is a very knit-worthy person. He still wears the hat to this day, but he's had to get, I guess, a bit creative in how he wears it. So the way he wears the Oslo hat is he flips it inside out, and then the folded hem, the double folded hem, he has to fold up really, really high. And I think he does this because with the Oslo hat, there's the reverse stockinette portion. And so if he wore the Oslo hat the right side out, but then just had to fold the double folded hem even higher, you'd see the pearl bumps. So he wears it inside out. And so I figured this year I have to knit him another hat because I was just a little embarrassed seeing him wearing that hat all the time. So I decided to go with a different hat pattern. I chose the Hipster Hat because I had the statement green color and I felt like it looked really nice in the Hipster Hat. Petite Knit used this yarn color for one of her samples, so I knew it was going to be really nice. I know that he really likes bright colors. And the Hipster Hat is 2x2 ribs, so it would be stretchy and it should be able to fit him. So I knit the hat kind of almost to pattern. The pattern calls for, or one of the suggested yarns is Sandnes Garn Double Sunday, which is the yarn that I have here, on 3.5 millimeter needles, and it's all over 2x2 rib. You're basically knitting this giant 2x2 rib tube, and then you start working crown decreases, but still maintaining the 2x2 rib pattern. So it's a very simple hat to knit. I really liked it as a portable project. I did make some changes to it though because of the yarn. So I find that Sandnes Garn Double Sunday can tend to grow a lot with blocking. At least that's my experience using it. It's not superwash merino, but for some reason for me, I don't know, maybe it's the blocking methods that I use, but I find that it tends to grow. So I sized down to a size medium for his hat, and I knit it on 3 millimeter needles. So the rib is a little bit tighter, but I really wanted to make sure that the hat wasn't going to grow too much with blocking and also with him wearing it over the years. And so the hat did turn out a little bit tight. I did manage to block it out quite a bit, but I do think it is a little bit tight on him, but I'm hoping it's okay and that the 2x2 rib will just continue to stretch with time. So that was the first modification just because of the yarn. And then the second thing that I did was a super minor change, but if I were to do it again, I might do it a little bit differently. So the Hipster Hat calls for a tubular cast on. And I just can never get tubular cast on to look nice. I've tried a lot of times and I just never like how it looks, especially when transitioned into 2x2 rib. So I just decided to do a long tail cast on, and this is again a very minor change that I would make again if I were to work this hat, but I just cast on in a long tail cast on pretty loosely so it would still be able to stretch, which I think was the point of the tubular cast on. So I just cast on loosely. But what I didn't do is I didn't flip my work to work in the reverse direction, so that once the brim of the hat is flipped up, you didn't see the pearl bumps that you get from a long tail cast on. I think if I were to have flipped my work, I would have gotten a little bit of a cleaner look once I flipped the brim of the hat up and just seen those horizontal knit bars. So that's like one super minor thing that I would have changed about my cast on there, but I'm happy with the long tail cast on. And if you don't like the look of tubular cast on, I think either like a long tail cast on or an Icelandic cast on looks perfectly fine for the hat. If you also struggle like me with tubular cast on. So overall, really like the hat. It's a really popular hat pattern, I think for good reason. Very simple to knit, has a really nice fit. I don't really love Sandnes Garn Double Sunday though. I only used this yarn because I had this yarn left over from my downtown hoodie, which is a test knit that I did in 2023, and I ended up frogging it. So I had about 2 skeins of this Double Sunday, which was the perfect amount for a hat. So that's kind of the only reason why I used it. If I didn't have this yarn already in stash, I probably wouldn't have used Double Sunday, and I would have used another light worsted weight wool. I do really enjoy the color selection in Double Sunday. I do think it's really beautiful. Like the statement green is really lovely, but the Double Sunday is just, I think, kind of pretty loosely plied. And so when you work with this yarn, at least I find that the yarn can tend to split as you're knitting, and it also has a looser twist, and the knit stitch to me doesn't look very even. Like I don't really like the texture that you get with it. I think it's the difference between also like an S ply and a Z ply. I could be making it up. I don't know a lot about that. But I just noticed with this particular yarn, I don't really love how it looks knit up as well. So I don't think I would use double Sunday again in the future, unless there was one particular color that I was really interested in working with. I think, actually, no, I don't even think I'd use double Sunday. I think I'd just use Sunday held double, which I like a lot more. So that's one thing. I didn't love the yarn, but it was a really great pattern. I'm really happy with it. It's a really cool statement hat. Moving on to whips, I think we'll start with my newest cast on, and it is a project that I am trying to finish ASAP because I really wanted this done as a Chinese New Year sweater. I don't know if I'll be able to finish it in time because Chinese New Year is next week, and maybe I was a little bit over ambitious thinking I could finish this sweater in less than 3 weeks, but this is where I'm at right now. This is the Clematis Sweater by Emma's Knits, and I'm using, again, Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino. You can tell that I do really like the yarn, or I've had it in stash for a while because I bought this yarn, a lot of this yarn, I guess, a few years ago. So I'm using Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino in the shade red with Drops Kid Silk also in the shade red. And I really wanted this bright, vibrant red sweater for a number of occasions throughout the year. I think I first wanted this sweater for the holiday season. That didn't happen, so I said I'll try for Chinese New Year. I don't really know if that's going to happen now, so what I'm going to say is I will finish this by Valentine's Day. Not a big fan of Valentine's Day, really. I usually just do like something really low-key, don't do anything fancy for it, but I want to set a goal for myself, so this will be my Valentine's Day sweater if I don't finish it by next week, which is looking very likely. But enough about that. I will chat now about my experience with the sweater and my progress so far. So the Clematis Sweater is a really cool and I would say pretty striking sweater, and it has a really nice twist on a basic stockinette sweater because you have this diagonal button band across the front. And the way that the sweater is constructed is it is top down, and it has, I would say, like a baby drop shoulder. When I try this on, it fits like just over the shoulder here, and then you work some short rows for the sleeve. And the sweater is intended to have about 5 centimeters of positive ease, so a relatively fitted sweater as well. I am knitting this with the Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino and then the Drops Kid Silk, so I would say that the yarn combination that I'm using is a little bit thicker than what the pattern suggests, and I'm also knitting this on 4mm needles instead of 4.5, again to account for how much this yarn should grow with blocking. So the way that you construct this sweater is you knit the back panel first. And something that kind of surprised me about this sweater is there is no shaping in the back. I feel like most of the sweaters that I've done in the past little while have had some sort of shaping at the back, either with short rows or increases to get like a trapezoidal shape along the back. And this one does not. It's kind of like the Kutar wrap cardigan where you just cast on and you're working a rectangle for the back. So I'm kind of intrigued to see how this is going to fit. I have tried it on in progress now, but without the diagonal button band and the neckline especially, it's kind of hard to tell. I do think that it is fitting okay, but yeah, it's kind of surprising to me that it fits that well without the short rows. So you do the back panel and then you do the front panels here. And the front panels are 3 separate pieces that you then join together. So you start off with the left panel here. You just pick up stitches from the back and then you work the panel down. And then you do the same for the right front panel here. But you work it a little bit longer and a bit narrower because the way that the diagonal button band starts is it starts on one end and then travels across. So then the way that you do that is really interesting and very ingenious of Emma the designer. You basically cast on, once you're done those 2 front panels, you cast on this tiny little baby strap here. And you do it in a way where it overlaps with the right front here. So you pick up stitches and then you work this strap that then connects to the left front strap, and then you work that panel a little bit more before you then join the work at the underarm, and then you're working the body of the sweater. And then for the rest of the body, you're just doing a very simple pattern repeat to shape the diagonal button band. You're basically increasing on one side and decreasing on the other, so the stitch count stays the same, but then you get the button band here. So I think it's a really intuitive and relatively simple knit. I am thinking that I'm almost done the body here because I may want to crop this sweater. I'm not playing a game of yarn chicken right now, which is quite rare, but I just kind of like the look of a little bit more of a cropped clematis sweater. So yeah, we'll see if I am good with the length. I'm going to try it on after this podcast episode before working the ribbing. And then after that, I have the neckline and then the sleeves, and then I think I'll finish off with the button band at the end. I'll now move on to my next whip, which is one of my oldest whips, and it is my Jenny Jacket V-neck by Petite Knit. So this is where I'm at. Since the last podcast episode, I finished both sleeves, and I am on to the double knit button band, so I'm almost done this whip. I'm thinking that it will be done by the next podcast episode. This has been a really long-term whip. It's a top-down, all-over textured smock stitch jacket, and it had probably been 2 months since I last worked on it when it was time to pick up the sleeves. And so I just made a little bit of a dumb mistake when I was working in the sleeves. So the way that you do the smock stitch is it is a 6-row repeat, but I forgot about that because it had been 2 months. I totally forgot that that's how you work the smock stitch for the body. And the instructions for the sleeves are you pick up stitches all the way around, and then the first smock repeat here is 7 rounds, and I forgot that the rest of the jacket you smock every 6 rounds. So I just totally misread the instructions for the sleeve, and I just assumed that the smock stitches worked every 7 rounds. So I finished one of the sleeves, and then I was noticing as it was next to the body that it kind of looked a little bit weird, like the smock wasn't lining up with the smocks on the body. And so I took a look at the instructions again, and then I realized my dumb mistake that I did them every 7 rounds. So there was an extra row in every smock. And yeah, I don't really know why I did like to skim the pattern like that. The pattern instructions for the sleeves are super detailed. They're written out basically row by row because you're working decreases before every smock repeat, and that impacts how the smock stitch is able to look at the bottom, because sometimes the smock doesn't line up as you're decreasing in either knit stitch or purl stitch. So the pattern instructions are super detailed and super clear for the sleeve. I just think after the first repeat, they're kind of grouped in like bunches together, like from row 22 to 26 you're just working in 2x2 rib. So then I think I mistook that for like 6 rows instead of 5 rows, or I don't know, something happened where I did that mistake, so I ended up needing to frog and then redo my first sleeve. So that was a little bit of a setback, but I have no one to blame but myself for misreading the pattern instructions. So if you are working in the Jenny Jacket V-neck, just the first time is 7 rounds, but then the rest is back to the 6. And then another thing that I noticed about the sleeves as I was working them is I ended up adding some additional smock stitches at the middle of the underarm. So as I mentioned, the smock sleeve instructions are written out very detailed because as you're decreasing in either knit stitch or purl stitch, you may not be able to work a full smock stitch here, which is smock across 6 stitches. So because you're decreasing, you may not be able to do that. So the pattern instructs when you should do the smock stitch and when you shouldn't, and where you should start it. But I was noticing, I'll maybe put a picture maybe over here to show what it looked like the first time I was doing it. I noticed that there was really wide sections of just 2x2 rib instead of a smock stitch, and I didn't really like how it looked. I honestly thought it was more noticeable than if you just squished a bunch of smock stitches in there. So that's what I did. There's certain sections here where if it was a really long row of 2x2 rib, I just did like one huge smock stitch, or I did like two smock stitches like this one here right beside each other. And I kind of feel like it's less noticeable, even though it doesn't line up properly, than if you just had big areas of just 2x2 rib with no smock. So I didn't write out how I did that, but I will put a picture of this on my Ravelry if you wanted to follow it as well. And I do really like the look of that better. It's not perfect. Like some of them do look a little bit messy, but I do prefer the look of that. So I did the same thing on the second sleeve. And then now I'm on to the double knit button band. And the double knit button band for this pattern is just so clever, so genius. You're able to work the buttonholes without breaking your yarn. It's a tutorial, and I don't know if it's a concept that was invented by Petite. I don't know if she came up with it or if she discovered it, but there is a video tutorial for it. So that is just very genius, very clever, and I'm just following that exactly for this button band here. So nothing much to report on besides I have a lot of double knitting to go. But once I finish the buttonholes here, I think it should be pretty straightforward. So this is my progress on the Jenny jacket, and excited to have this one done soon. My next whip is another jacket cardigan situation, and it is my Peacock cardigan. So this is where I'm at with the cardigan. Since the last podcast episode, I finished the lace yoke. I worked the short rows and the raglan increases, and then now I'm just onto the body. So the Peacock cardigan is a pattern by Knit or Lanholm Samso. I'm using light sport and mohair held together. So Hisuji Chan Natural, which is an undyed heathered brown shade. I have one of the yarns here. It's a Japanese yarn, and there's 75 meters for every 25 grams. So smaller balls, but I'm using this yarn here with Knitting for Olive, soft silk mohair in the shade Hazel. My suggested yarn is a little bit heavier than what the pattern suggests, which is fingering and mohair. So I am getting a little bit of a thicker fabric, but I'm liking how it looks both in the lace and in the stockinette so far. I had a lot of difficulty with finishing the lace yoke of this cardigan. So I think I've mentioned it a few times now, but the way that this cardigan is constructed is you have a round lace yoke, and you knit this according to a lace chart that's in the pattern. And then once you're finished this lace chart, you then work a few rounds. At least for my size, you don't have to work as many raglan increases, but for other sizes I think you do need to knit a bit more to get the bust. But nonetheless, every size you're knitting a section of raglan increases, and while you're working those raglan increases here, you're working some short rows along the back to raise the back of the neck of the cardigan a little bit higher, to help with the fit. And I do think that that will help, but I think that the stitch count when you're ready to start separating for the raglan stitches is wrong for size extra small. So for size extra small, you're supposed to follow lace chart A, and at the end of the lace chart, I won't give the total number of stitches away, though I don't know if that will give that much away, but I won't say it. So you're supposed to have X number of stitches, or 26 stitches per pattern repeat. And I did not have that number of stitches. I was 20 stitches short of that total number, and I couldn't figure out how I got to 20 stitches short because I followed the lace pattern chart correctly. Like, I didn't have any issues with it, and so I was really confused. And then I looked at the lace chart, and each repeat for lace chart A only has 24 stitches. So I don't really know how you're supposed to get 2 extra stitches if you're following the chart. So I'm pretty sure it's an error. And somebody also messaged me on Instagram saying that they had the same experience, like they also think it's a mistake. So I don't think that it's the way that I am reading the pattern. I think it's an error. So basically what I did was, for lace chart C, there's a final round of increases, which would get me to 26 stitches. So I ended up doing lace chart C for the last 5 rounds, and you can see on the final row of the lace chart here, the purl bump here is extra wide, and that's because of the increases. And I'm just telling myself that it doesn't bother me. I feel like it doesn't take away from the lace repeat. It's just I'm a little bit annoyed that I had to do that and make that modification, and it doesn't fully line up, but it's okay because I think at this point I had done this like 3 times already, trying to find a way to get the right stitch count, that I was kind of over it. I was kind of sick of doing the feather and fan repeats like for a 3rd time for the last repeat. So I have accepted that it might look a little bit weird at the bottom, but I don't know if anyone else really notices it. It's just a minor thing. But we did reach the proper stitch count, despite my annoyance, I guess, with the repeat. And here we are. So we finished the short rows for the back. And then once you're done, you split for the body and the sleeves. The sleeves are put on stitches on hold. And then now I am working on the body. So it's a really nice, relaxing project to have. I am glad to be done the lace now, to just be working on stockinette again. And I think after this, I'll maybe see if I want to do the button band first. I am now going back and forth on if I want the front button placket to be double knit or 1x1 rib. So we'll see. But this is where I'm at with the Peacock cardigan. I'll put the modifications that I did to follow the different lace chart in my Ravelry notes, if you also run into this issue with this pattern. And then the next whip that I have to share is my Marie pillow. This is going to be like a 30-second update because the Marie pillow is just a square panel. So there's really not that much change, besides I knit about 7 more centimeters since the last time that I podcasted. I don't really think people find this interesting to see these updates, but it is helping me be more motivated to finish this pillow. So I will continue to show the slow progress that I make to this Marie pillow, because it is very, very slow, knit on 3mm needles, and it is a slip stitch garter, so it is a bit tough on the hands. So I just wanted to show that this is how far I am. I think once I reach the halfway point, I'll order the pillow insert from Petite Knit's website, and then I'll find the pillow insert somewhere here, and then I'll hopefully have this as a home decor piece sometime in the spring. But this is where I am at. There's not really that much to update, but it's motivating me to continue working on it. So yeah, update on my Marie pillow, super quick. And then the last whip that I have to share is, I guess, more of like a whip update, because I'm thinking of frogging this whip, and I wanted to chat through like my reasoning for frogging, or like having not like failed projects, but projects that you no longer love anymore. So this is the Couture wrap cardigan, and this has been a cardigan that's been on my to knit list for such a long time, and I think that's kind of part of the reason why I no longer love it anymore. I think I kind of overhyped it in my head. I really love the look of the lace panel on the front, and maybe I will want to knit it eventually, but as of right now, I kind of fell out of love with the design. I'm not sure how I feel about the looser gauge here, even though I sized down half a needle size. And I also just don't really like the belt tie for the Couture wrap. I don't really like how it goes along the outside, and I don't know how it's gonna look on if I move the belt to be in the inside, like snake through the back on the inside of the wrap, because it's a loose gauge. Like, I don't know if you're gonna see it or it's gonna kind of like stick out a little bit. So I think right now I just don't love the project enough to work on the whole cardigan, so why force myself to work on it, because it's something that I have wanted to knit for a really long time. So I think I'm going to frog the cardigan. I don't have very much done, but I think I'm going to frog it. And another design that's been really catching my eye is the Clematis Sweater, which is a pattern that's still in testing, or maybe the testing is done, but is going to be released in the future by CL Knits. I really like that pattern, and I'm hoping it's going to come out soon. I think it's going to look really nice in this gray color. So frogging this pattern for that one, I think. And then the last whip that I no longer have, that I was showing in my last podcast episode, was the Aosta baby sweater. I ended up frogging that. It was supposed to be part of a gift for a friend's baby shower, but at the time I was just working on a lot of my ornaments for markets. I was also thinking about other gift knits that I really wanted to finish, and I was just getting a little bit overwhelmed. So I had to give up something, and it was the baby sweater. And I was thinking it kind of works out because the baby is going to be a summer baby, and I was knitting like a 3-month-old size for that, so the baby wouldn't have been able to fit in the sweater anyways for that long. So I was like, I had to frog it, and then we ended up not gifting it. But that's not to say I won't knit for the baby in the future. I had to give something up to make my knitting exciting again, because at the end of the day, it's a hobby and I should be excited about it. So that's an update on those 2 whips. I wasn't going to mention them, but I kind of want to mention like failed whips or things that I end up frogging, because I do think that the reason for not finishing a project is almost as important as the reasoning for finishing a project. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that I ended up frogging those. So those were all of my whips at the moment, and I do have some acquisitions to share. I placed a pretty large KnitPicks order, I would say, at the end of the year, in November, when KnitPicks was having their, I think it's their semi-annual sale, or it was their winter sale. So I ended up placing an order on KnitPicks because I just wanted to give a little gift to myself, a little celebration. I had finished all of my markets, and I was really proud of myself, and so I had a low buy rule in 2024. It's something that I'm going to continue to carry into 2025, and I think that I was really good at sticking to that. I had gamified rules for using up my stash, and I think that I was pretty good at sticking to that throughout the year. But there are sometimes occasions where you just want to treat yourself. And this was one of them. So I did place a KnitPicks order, and I got some yarn that I have been interested in trying out for a while, and some yarns to help me with my sock knitting, which is something that I want to get more into this year. So I will grab the yarn. I have the yarn here, but one non-yarn item that I wanted to mention that I got from KnitPicks that I would recommend checking out is the wool washes. So I really like using Eucalyptus, which is a lightly scented wool wash. They do have an unscented version, but they have some nice light scents. I really like using Jasmine, which I find tends to be sold out at a lot of my local yarn stores, so I can never really get it in person, but it's also sold on KnitPicks, and you can get a pretty good deal on it when they run their semi-annual sales. I think I got the wool wash for either 30 or 40% off during the sale, so it's a pretty good deal, and it's also a way if you need to reach the free threshold of shipping as well. So I'd recommend checking out KnitPicks for also wool washes. So I got that, and I also got some yarn. So the first set of yarn that I got is KnitPicks Stroll. So I really want to get into finding my basic sock recipe that's going to really fit my foot next year, and in order to do that, I wanted to get some solid sock yarn. I don't really have a lot of solid sock yarn, so I checked out KnitPicks Stroll because I saw that Summer Lee Knits really recommended Stroll. It's one of her favorite sock yarns. I even got some of the colors that she recommended, and I wanted to get this yarn for a long time, but I think after she recommended this yarn, it kind of went not like viral, but a lot of the colors that she mentioned were sold out after she posted that video. I'll link it down below if you're curious and you haven't seen it before. But Stroll was really high on her list, and she really recommended 3 of the 4 colors that I got. They were finally in stock, so I decided I'll try them out, and I do really like the color combinations together for some socks. So this one is the shade Boy. It's like a very vibrant orangey red. And then I got Dogwood Heather, which kind of surprised me. This in person to me is more of a flamingo red. I was kind of thinking that it would be more like a pale ballerina pink, but it's more of like a orangey warm tone pink, which is not my favorite, but I also don't mind it with these other colors. So yeah, I'll try it out, but this color kind of surprised me, the Dogwood Heather. And then this one is just screaming in your face. It's Pucker. It's a super bright highlighter pink. So this one is really fun. And then the last one that I got is hazy violet. It's just a really nice light lavender purple. So I'm hoping that I can maybe knit a few vanilla socks with this sock yarn here and try to get a nice fitting stockinette sock because I haven't found that yet. I also got a Knit Pick Stroll 3 balls in the shade Cork because I really liked this brown shade for some future Pop-Tart ornaments. This one showed up a little bit darker. I find that with Knit Picks, their website, sometimes the photos aren't the most accurate in color. So I try to go on Ravelry, I search up the yarn, and then I search up the color in the stash section of the yarn. And usually you're able to find a truer to color photo of what the yarn is supposed to look like, but this one still surprised me. This one is still a little bit darker than what I was expecting, but I did get 3 of them because I do like this color for a accessory in the future, like either a hat or a pair of mittens. So I did get 3 to make sure I have enough. I got 1 ball of the next few yarns because I just wanted to try out the bases, and I figured that I could still knit some smaller accessories with 1 ball. So I got the Knit Picks Animation, which is a DK weight 100% cotton. I don't know what the shade is called. Oh, it's called Blush. So I got this one because I do really like using cotton for my donut ornaments. So I got this ball just to try out their cotton. I also got these 2 balls in the same shade because I just wanted to try out the base for some potential future garment projects. So I got Knit Picks Wool of the Andes Sport Weight, which is 100% Peruvian Highland wool. It's the same as their Wool of the Andes worsted, but just at a lighter weight. And then I got the same color Dove Heather in Swish, which is a DK weight 100% superwash merino wool. So kind of just wanted to see how these felt next to each other for a future garment, but I'll find a use for them in the future. And then I got another light gray heathered shade, 2 more balls of Knit Picks palette in the shade Finley Heather, which is the yarn that I used for my Jenny jacket, because I'm hoping that I can use the leftovers of my Jenny jacket with these 2 balls to knit a winter clutch. I already have the accessories for the clutch, like the clasp and the chain already, so I would like it in a light gray. So I got 2 balls to be able to make that sometime in the future. And then the last thing that I got was a sweater quantity of mohair. Like I said, it was in order to treat myself, so I really wanted to get some of this light purple aloft because I'm thinking of holding it with my Noro Silk Garden Sock solo yarn for a sweater this year. I have it here. I have this yarn here, the infamous S1 Omitama shade, and I really like the look of it with either like a light pink or a light purple, so I went with the light purple. I'm gonna see how it looks knit up, but if I don't like that, I do also really like the shade for just a basic stockinette. I like this pastel color. So this is the shade Pennyroyal, and I was also curious to see if they changed any sort of formulation at all with this yarn, because earlier this year Knit Picks discontinued a few shades but then released a few more shades in this space. They always had this shade here, Pennyroyal, so I don't really know if they would have changed that much about it, but it feels the exact same. So as of right now, I think that Loft is still the same base, it's still the same great quality. So I got this shade here. So that was all the yarn from Knit Picks, some yarns that I'm going to be using over the next little bit. And I could really see that my color palette was starting to change a bit. It's a lot of pinks and purples, which is really different from what I'm used to knitting up. So happy to try out all of these different colors, but also the bases, and then hopefully report back in some projects. So that was what I got from Knit Picks. I also got some yarn and a book recently. So I got this book, Knit, which is the book by Rose Knitwear. The designer's name is Alice Hoyle, and I really loved the patterns in this book. I think that this book is a little bit different in that I would say like just under half of the patterns that are offered in this book are also available as individual patterns on Rose Knitwear. So they were either previous designs or maybe they're new-ish designs that were released at the same time as the book. But there are patterns in here that you can get individually if you don't want to get the whole book or if you don't have access to the book. But I thought it was a good value for money to get the book and to get a collection of these patterns, because I am really attracted to Rose Knitwear as a designer because I think she is really a great designer to follow if you are interested in using up some scrap yarn. So I was really attracted to quite a number of the designs that I think I'm going to knit up. So that's why I asked for this book for Christmas. Maybe I'll highlight some of the favorites that I have here, and I'll put like a little picture here. I really like the Escher beanie, the Upstream sweater. I think that looks really cool in that textured stitch. I really like the Static mittens, which is a pattern that I think is a few years old now, and I've always seen it on my Instagram feed, and I really like the look of it. The Scribble top, which is another pretty iconic Rose Knitwear pattern, is also featured in this book. But the one pattern that was kind of the main reason, or a big reason why I wanted this book, was the mix-up blanket. This is a pattern that's only available in the book as of right now. And this is the first knit blanket pattern that I saw and I immediately wanted to knit. I find that a lot of the home decor that I knit, like blankets, I end up crocheting because I just find that it's a little bit faster and I like the stitch textures more. But this pattern here, the mix-up blanket, I just fell in love with immediately. So I really wanted to get this book for this pattern. I'm thinking that this will be a longer term whip that I'll start sometime this year. The only issue is with this blanket is it uses worsted weight yarn. You need either between 63 meters to 220 meters of each color. It's like a log cabin construction, knit in all over garter stitch. And the other thing is I don't use a lot of worsted weight yarn in projects, so I think it's going to take me a while to accumulate enough worsted weight scrap yarn for this blanket. So I think for this piece, it's going to be a mix of scrap yarn that I can kind of fudge together to create a worsted weight gauge, and it's going to be some new worsted weight yarn in colors specifically for this blanket. So it's not going to be a totally scrappy project, but I do really like the look of this blanket. So that was the reason why I got this book for Christmas. And the first square that I'm going to start with is going to be using some of this yarn here. So this is the leftovers from my honey vest. It's a fingering weight wool, but I think if I hold it double, it's still going to be a little bit thinner than a worsted, but it's a way for me to use up a lot of this yarn. So I'm thinking that my first panel is going to be very similar to the designer Alice's sample. It's going to be this cream and this black shade. And this is my last acquisition that I got over the last 2 months since my last podcast episode. I was gifted this yarn from Premier Yarns to try out. I have used Premier Yarns in the past before, just what I could find at Michael's. I've never ordered on their website before. But they reached out to me and said that they have some yarn that they think I would really like for some garments, such as Stitch Please, which is a 100% wool. They have Stitch Please in a few variations. They have superwash wool, untreated 100% wool like this. They have a worsted weight version, a bulky weight version. They also have a DK weight version. So Premier sent me some of the yarn to try, and I was thinking that these could be the first blocks of the mix-up blanket. So it's 200 meters for every 100 grams, and this is the shade Black Sheep. So this is going to be the first panel. For the next panel, I think I'll use this shade here, which is Kale Yeah. That's another really funny thing I noticed about this yarn line is they have a lot of puns in the names, which is not really that important, but it's fun to look through when you're browsing the shades. So yeah, anyways, I'm going to be using this green here with some Pure Gint that I have in stash. So like I said, this mix-up blanket's going to be a long-term project where I use a mix of scrap yarn and maybe some new colors to just tie the blanket together. So that will be a new whip coming in the future. So that was everything for this podcast episode. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much if you reached this point in the video. I think it's going to be a little bit of a longer podcast because I had a longer acquisition section. So if you stuck around and watched that, thank you so much. I will continue to work on my Chinese New Year sweater and really hope that I can finish it, but not that confident anymore. So if not, will be a Valentine's Day project. And I'll also be working on my Jenny jacket to finish that double knit button band and to finish the jacket by January 31st, which is the deadline that I have for that jacket. So I'll be working away on those whips and then sharing them in my next podcast episode. So until then, happy knitting.